Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Well Off Podcast. I'm your host, George Masri, and I interviewed Natasha Cultraro today. Natasha is a real estate investor, and she is the owner of Investor's Choice Property Management, which is based in Ontario. But here's the cool thing about her. Her and her family actually recently moved to Costa Rica. So they've been there since October 2020, and it's awesome to see somebody be able to basically live out their dream. They have the real estate, they have the resources to go away. And as I get older, I start to think more and more about doing that myself, like setting a goal to have a place. I think we'd like to be in Italy, potentially along the water or something like that. But anyway, we talked about a lot of property management related things. We actually have a lot in common as well. Her family lived in Lebanon for a bit, so that's where my family's from as well. But anyway, on this episode, we talked about the worst problem she's ever encountered as a property manager and how she dealt with it. We talked about what happens if a tenant passes away in the unit if they were living alone. What happens if you want to sell your property and the tenant's being difficult? What's the best way to go about that? And we also talked about qualifying tenants. So what are some of the tips, the tricks that she can share with us? A lot of good things in here. I hope you'll enjoy. If you do enjoy it, make sure to share this episode with your friends and family. Make sure to leave us a review on iTunes, so on the Apple Podcast platform. And if you want to connect with me, go to welloff.ca. You could download some free reports if you go welloff.ca/report. One of them is why you shouldn't be investing in Burlington, Oakville, and some of these other areas around the GTA. So I hope you'll find that valuable. Enjoy the episode, and I look forward to connecting with you. Welcome to the Well Off Podcast, where the goal is to motivate, inspire, and share success principles. Today, I'm here with Natasha Cultraro, who is a real estate investor and owner of Investor's Choice Property Management, which is based in Ontario. And the cool thing is that her and her family have actually moved to Costa Rica. They continue to invest, and they're living the pure life, Pura Vida, I guess you could say. And Natasha was just telling me that you guys have found potentially a spot that you'll be building your dream home on. So congratulations on that. And that's awesome that you made the move. Yeah. Why'd you pick Costa Rica just to start?
Actually, Costa Rica was not our first choice. Ever since I met my husband, when we were teenagers, he's wanted to move somewhere hot. California was high on our list. And we tried for many years to make the move to California, but immigration is surprisingly hard, even for Canadians. Mm-hmm. And then there were some things that happened in the US that made it less desirable. And in the meantime, we had visited Costa Rica. The first time we came here was in 2017, and we fell in love with it. And so we decided, we can make our dreams come true so much faster and more affordably if we move to Costa Rica instead.
Nice. I love that. That's so cool. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I like to start off by asking you a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and maybe one or two things you remember.
Of course. I was actually born in the Middle East. My parents were born and raised in Lebanon, and I grew up Armenian. So From a nationality, I am Armenian, 100%. We came to Canada when I was 2, and my sisters were born in Canada, and I grew up within the Armenian community. So there are a lot of pros and cons with that. And although I was very sheltered in that community, both by my parents and by the community, there were a lot of great things that came out of that kind of upbringing.
That's so weird. I always thought you were Portuguese. I'm guessing your husband's Portuguese or Brazilian or something?
His name is Italian. So his father is a very Italian, very Sicilian, off the boat right from Sicily.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Because I'm actually Lebanese. So
I knew you were some kind of Middle Eastern.
Yeah. So that's so weird that I had no idea. I always thought you were Portuguese for some reason. I don't know. I thought it was a Portuguese name, but that's cool. And I have some cousins.
Lebanon are you?
I'm not. I wasn't born there, but my family's like pretty close to Beirut. They're originally from there, but I do have some Armenian cousins as well. So that's so cool. Yeah. Okay. So did you say you were born here? You were born in Lebanon, or?
I was born in the Middle East.
Yeah. In the Middle East. Yeah.
And I was 2 when I came here. So I've into Canada. So I
Yeah.
pretty much grew up in Canada.
Cool. Did you grow up in the Durham region or somewhere else?
No, in in Toronto, in Scarborough, there's an Armenian community center and school
Yeah.
called ARS at Victoria Park and 401. So that was the hub. That's where
Okay.
we were.
Nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, well, that's really interesting to know. So you guys come here, and where does this desire to own real estate come from? And because obviously you're a property manager or you have a property management company, but you also own a lot of real estate, it sounds like. So where does that desire to own real estate come from?
Very simply, it comes from my mother.
Mm-hmm.
We had rented my whole childhood, and my mother could see that, you know, we're renting and we're putting this money and we're paying the landlord's mortgage. And so it took my parents a long time to buy a home. So I was 16 when we bought our first family home. We were renting until then. And my mom always put it in my head. She said, don't waste money on rent, buy as soon as you can. And with that in my head, when it was time for me to move out, I actually rented for 1 year in Scarborough. And then we bought our first property in Oshawa, my husband Paul and I, because it was affordable and because it was a duplex, and we'll get into that, but also because it was closer to my mother, because by that point, she had moved out to Curtis herself.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, like to think where your mom comes from, that the idea of owning a lot of real estate, I don't know if that's something people think about really in the Middle East. Not so much. People for the most part are trying to survive, so it's great that she had that vision. And so tell me a little bit more about your journey. Where did you end up, how did you end up getting into property management?
After I finished high school, I did a diploma in biotechnology, and I got a corporate job at a pharmaceutical company. I worked for two major pharmaceutical companies for 13 years, something like that. And just like you, actually, the corporate world was just not for me. I just wasn't built for it. And I had to do what I had to do. Over those 13 years, I was building my portfolio. I was educating myself on real estate investing and making connections. And then one day came a turning point, and I thought, you know what? I'm wasting my life in this corporate world. I'm wasting my time. And that was in 2017 when I decided I was going to quit. And I gave myself till the end of the year, the end of the calendar year, to replace my income. And with hard work and with the grace of God, or whatever you want to call it, I was able to make it happen.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. Congratulations. How many? Well, I mean, if you want to share, but maybe it's kind of a personal question. But how many properties did it take for you to reach your goal? You had to acquire quite a few by the end of the term that you had set for yourself.
Surprisingly, not that many, because I was at first, when I set up the business, I was not pricing my services properly. And so I thought it was going to take me a very, very long time to reach my goals. However, I realized that I can charge. So basically, we were not charging for tenant placement. And tenant placement is, of course, a big part of the business. It's actually the most important part of property management, because if you have a good tenant in there, management is just downhill from there. So I was including that in the monthly management fee. And when I realized that I was very far from what the industry average was in my area, then I realized that I did have to charge for those services. And when I did, it became much easier.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I can't deny that I have a spouse. I have a husband that was working at the time, so he was also bringing in money. I mean, we have a daughter that we have to take care of, and if I didn't have that kind of backup, and not just the financial part, but the emotional support as well, I would not have been able to do what I did.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So he supported you in starting this business, and I'm assuming also in your real estate investing. Was he also investing at the time, or is that something that you kind of brought into your relationship?
We bought our first house together. So
Okay.
we were teenagers when we met, and we bought our first house. We were 20. I was 21 years old. He was 22, so very young.
Yeah.
And we bought a duplex. So the reason that we wanted the duplex, that I insisted on a duplex, was for that security, because at that point I did not have the mind frame. I did not have the investor mindset yet.
Hmm.
And when he saw the income that was coming in, he was all over that. And he said, okay, we're going to do the next one and then the next one. And he had this path planned out
Yeah.
for exponential growth for us.
Yeah.
And so, but from the two of us, we are a team when it comes to investing, although I am doing some investing within my business without him. So, but right now, all of our investments are together.
Great. Good. Yeah, I had a few questions that I was going to ask you, just a couple that I had prepared, and we'll see what we can get through right now. So I guess the first one is, what's the worst problem you ever encountered and how did you solve it? Of course, pertaining to property management.
I guess the worst problem is when tenants aren't paying,
Hmm.
because the landlord is losing money month after month after month after month. And there are a couple of different things we can do. We can work within the LTB, or we can try working outside of the LTB. Sometimes we do both. So within the LTB, it's a standard process. It's the N4, it's the L1, and then we have to wait for a hearing.
Hmm.
Outside of the LTB, it's a cash for keys offer.
Yeah.
We have a situation now where we've got a tenant. This is a terrible situation. The tenant has been in this house not paying rent for almost a year, and he owes the landlord over $20,000.
Yeah.
And the reason it's gotten this bad is because the LTB is so behind on these hearings, and he's just sitting here getting free rent. He's told us he's going to file for bankruptcy, and that we can't get anything out of him. So this is really, the nightmare tenant that
Yeah.
everybody is thinking about. The best thing to do is be proactive with these things. And so what we do with all of our tenants is we make sure that we have a copy of their SIN card, or we have their license plate number, but we need something in order to chase them later.
Hmm.
So if worse comes to worse and they owe a bunch of money and they leave, and you have to go back and sue them through civil court to get that money back, you need to find where they are. You need their address.
Hmm.
And so with that information, you can track their address in order
Yeah.
to serve them those papers.
That's assuming that this tenant is working and or has some assets or something. If they're like on ODSP or they don't have any money or whatever, then I guess it doesn't really make sense to try to get anything out of them in that situation. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So my next question is, what happens if a tenant was living alone, let's say in a 1-bedroom unit, and they pass away? What would be the procedure there?
That's a tricky one.
Yeah.
And I think that the number one thing that we have to do is call 911. And we call them, they really need to be there to make sure there was no foul play. And then from there, you can pass that on from a technical perspective or a functional perspective to the police, and then they will take measures moving forward. They will help us call the appropriate authorities to remove the body. And then after that, we work with the owner and we talk about a couple of different options of how we can refresh the unit to remove we have to remove the tenants belongings. We have to contact the next of kin and make that transition. The lease that we have states that it's really dark, but this is the reality we live in. The lease that we have states that if the tenant passes away, then it's the end of the lease. So from an LTD legal perspective, that is covered, and then it's just about cleanup and moving forward. And actually, I'll tell you one more thing. I had a client who was very superstitious and hired a ghostbuster, for lack of a better term, to go in and clear the space just to make it fresh and clean for the next person that was coming in.
Yeah, I feel like I know a few people that would do that. Yeah. Um, now, what about? I don't know if you've ever encountered anything like this, and maybe this isn't necessarily your question to answer, but I'll ask it anyway, and we'll see what we get. Let's just say they had prepaid the year in advance, and they pass away 6 months into their lease. I would assume that the remaining 6 months that they had prepaid would go to their estate.
That is a very specific question.
Yeah, not for you.
But what I will tell you is that as a landlord in Ontario, we are not allowed to collect any more than 1 month's rent,
Mhm.
and that is supposed to be used for last month's rent.
Yes.
So that can't be used for security as a security deposit or a damage deposit.
Yeah.
And so if depending on where this was tried, if it is within the LTB, which I doubt, the LTB would say, um, landlord, you're in the wrong because you shouldn't have collected that to begin with.
Even if the tenant offered it, like let's just say they said, "Hey, I don't want to worry about paying rent every month. I just want to pay it up front." You're
Yes,
saying they would still think it was wrong for the landlord to do that?
yes, yes,
Interesting. Yeah.
yes. That we're as landlords in Ontario, we are not allowed to collect any more than 1 month's rent, and it has to be used for the last month's rent.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Okay.
It's not
Let's
my rule, but
yeah, yeah. I get that. Um, now, what about this is a pretty common thing because I'm also a realtor. So I've dealt with this, or I have colleagues that have dealt with this as well, where they're trying to sell a property that is tenanted, and the tenants being difficult. They're either not cooperating with showings, or maybe they're like when people are coming by, they're saying negative things about the property, scaring people away, that type of thing. What can you do in that situation? What would be your advice to make things a little smoother when it comes to selling the property?
so the best thing to do is, and when it comes to any issues with property management, is to foster and nurture that relationship with your tenant. Now, it sounds like there is no good relationship with the tenant in this situation, which is understandable. A lot of times we inherit tenants and we have to manage them, and we have missed the opportunity to avoid placing a tenant. I mean, if we didn't place a tenant, then we missed the opportunity to educate the landlord on what to avoid when screening a tenant in this way. I
Mhm.
have received many, many calls from realtors with this scenario exactly, especially during the last few months, when we really had, well, not just the last few months, for almost the past year. And as a realtor, you know what the market has been like.
Mhm.
Um, so the the best thing I can suggest, so we cannot ask the tenant to leave the property for a
Okay.
unit. We can ask, but we can't insist. We can't
Yes.
make them leave the property. And if they refuse entry, then it's, I mean, yes, we have an N5 that we can serve for refusing the landlord the right to complete his obligations. But it's just it doesn't make sense because it's such a long process, and you're trying to sell the house. You need an answer now.
Mhm.
um, what has worked for the realtors that I've spoken to, in the situations that I've spoken to them, is that the buyer was intending to live in the property. The
Mhm.
buyer, it was going to be their primary residence. And so we had, specifically, we had a, um, a tenant in a wheelchair, and it was very difficult for him to leave the property. He refused to cooperate. He didn't want to move. And so the realtor approached me, and she said, what can I do in this situation? And I said, it is so difficult for the current owner to evict or enforce, for this tenant to move,
Mhm.
or to leave during the showings. But if your new buyer is going to move into the house, it's going to be much easier for the buyer to evict the tenant that way. So
Right.
within the LTV. And so we suggest, and so although it was difficult for the showings, the buyer who was looking to buy it and move into the property knew that it was going to be easier for her to evict the tenant in the basement than for her to try and see the house, without the tenant in the basement.
Okay, so I've got a couple questions then. what notice do you serve in that scenario if you sold the house to somebody who is going to be moving into the property? Is it just a standard N11 or is there a different form you would serve?
It wouldn't be us, it would be the new owner. So after they close, they would have to serve the N12, I believe, and that's because they want to take possession of the property and move in themselves.
Right. Okay, so then let's just say you have, I'm just going to create a hypothetical situation, but you have a property that's closing on August 1st. And the buyer wants vacant possession because they're moving in, and then the tenant refuses to leave by August 1st. I mean, that's probably more of a lawyer's question, but I figured I'd ask you in case you were ever in that situation.
Yeah, so this is the scenario. If the tenant refuses to leave,
Yeah.
the seller doesn't have the seller doesn't have a lot of power. It doesn't have many
Yeah.
options. But when the buyer comes in and takes possession on August 1st, on August 2nd, the buyer can serve an N12 to the basement tenant.
Yeah.
But again, the tenant, I mean, then we have to go through the system.
Well,
So it'll take a few months.
I think you're assuming that this is a 2-unit property. I'm thinking like if it was just a single family home and the buyer wasn't able to move in because the tenant's refusing to leave. And then I would think that they could refuse to close in that situation as well.
Yes. So that's for the lawyers because the
Yes.
owner has to move in on that date.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I was assuming a duplex.
Yeah. You're an investor. I get it. You would never buy a home without a basement unit. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so yeah, I guess it's not an easy situation, but I think what I'm hearing you say is the number one option and the best thing to do would be to try to develop a good relationship with the tenants, work something out with them, because if you are looking for conflict, then it's gonna be difficult for you given the rules and the landlord tenant board, the time to get to court and all that stuff. Would you agree?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess the second option would be to sell it and have somebody that the person that's purchasing it move in so that it's a little bit easier to get the tenants out and hopefully they cooperate. Right. Okay. So there you go. Those are a couple things. I guess I was just gonna ask you, like, what are you seeing in terms of tenants moving out before the end of their lease term? Do you see that often? And um yeah, just out of curiosity.
We don't see it often. The majority of our tenants do stay within the lease term and stay and fulfill that lease term. I would say less than 5% break that lease.
Mm.
But but those are extreme circumstances, like maybe there's a divorce or a separation, or maybe there's an unexpected job loss. Definitely the way that we screen tenants has evolved with the world, and there are situations that we have learned to work with. So sometimes a tenant has a job that is affected by COVID, and so their work hours may be different. And we still do our due diligence. We want to make sure that we are confident with this tenant, and the story really checks out in our check. And with that, we're able to move forward with them. Since the pandemic began, I would not say there has been any change in that percentage of tenants that are breaking their lease early.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we're professionals, and tenant placement is what we are best at.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And in terms of finding the right tenants, are you doing the standard, getting a credit check, that type of thing? Or I know, like, I've started using Rentify. Are you using anything like that to make sure that you have as much information as possible on the tenant?
We are using a standard credit check, but we also do criminal checks upon request of the landlord. We check everything we have access to. We're even a part of the we're even a part of the landlord credit bureau, and so we check there to see if there's a history on that tenant. We don't use Rentify. We used to use Neighborly. We still sometimes use Neighborly. It's an extra level. It has a couple more screening tips, and then we also do a social media search, and we check them out on social media. There's not much we can see on social media, but sometimes it will confirm the pets that they have, the company that they keep, and rarely it'll include bits of their work. And so we can confirm a little bit on that end as well.
Yeah. What would be are there certain markers that you would see on social media that would lead you to believe that this is not a good tenant?
Excess partying and drinking, and valuing the wrong things. So sometimes we'll see things on a profile where the tenant is very against the man. You know what I mean? I'm kind of summarizing here, but they're angry at the world. They're angry at the government.
Yes.
And historically, that has been tenants that we are not able to maintain a working relationship with, and the relationship falls apart when they have this predisposition in their head of what a landlord is.
Okay. And maybe one last question on tenant screening. I know sometimes tenants might be relocating, or due to COVID, they might be a little bit nervous about meeting in person. So they might want to just apply based on photos and that type of thing. What are some of the precautions you would take to make sure that you're still able to qualify? Because I know you can get a certain feeling from meeting a tenant face to face. If that option's not available, what can you do to sort of, I guess, replace that interaction?
That interaction is very valuable.
Yeah.
Although we have when the lockdown first started in March, April 2020, there was a time when we were entertaining the idea of accepting a tenant that we had not met. But because the work that we do is considered a necessary service, we have been able to continue doing our showings in person, although we take the proper precautions.
Yeah.
We cannot replace that face-to-face assessment, that face-to-face evaluation, the qualification, because there's so much there that you cannot get over Skype, over the internet, through documents, through calling references. We have to meet them.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are some of the things you look for when you do meet someone face to face?
I can summarize it and say vibe, but to break it down very specifically, you want to make sure that the story that they're telling is in line, and the story is checking out with what they've told you before, with what their documents are telling us. We want to make sure, we want to look at them in the eye and make sure that they're not lying to us, because it's so much easier to lie to someone over the phone or via Skype. But when you're in there and you're talking to them and you're connecting with them, when they're lying. On top of that, you're going to look at their attire. You're going to look at how they groom themselves. So are they sloppy? Are their shoes dirty and broken? Are their laces untied? Look at the handbag, look at the hair, and are the clothes dirty and worn and ripped? Because that is going to tell you how they're going to keep your place. How they take care of themselves is how they're going to keep the place.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I made a mistake once I worked with a property management company, and they met the tenants, and they said that they were really nice and everything. And I guess this was earlier on when I first started investing. And so I took their word for it, and I never met the tenants myself. I actually never spoke to them. And as soon as they moved in, one of them was actually really difficult to work with. So I guess I made it a rule that even though I'm working with a property management company, I always want to personally meet or at least have a video call with a tenant to make sure that they're a right fit for the property.
Well, I can tell you that we have had new clients that have come to us and have insisted on meeting the tenant or having a phone call or a video call with the tenant before we place them, but it never lasts more than one. I think we've only had one or two that have insisted on that. And the repeat clients that we have, of course, they know what we're
Yes.
about. They know what our placement service is like. So
Oh yeah.
we
Yeah.
haven't had that, but that is a good that is very important for all investors to know. And it's important. I mean, I would even encourage it for new investors that are considering to come and work with us, because this is going to teach them too, you know, what we're doing, and they can have an understanding of what this kind of work is all about.
Oh, for sure. And I understand what you're saying. I just do like a 5 or 10 minute call. Even though they might be great people, maybe we just, for some reason, we don't click or we don't get along for whatever. And I just think I'd rather take that extra precaution, because once you sign up a tenant, you're in, like you're committed for a long time. So anyway, that's just the way that I've been doing it. We covered a few things here. Is there anything else you feel like is important to discuss before we move on to the next section?
I think that's it.
Okay, perfect. So the next section is the random five. I'm going to ask you 5 random questions, and you just tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Okay. So, what's the last meaningful book you read?
I'm rereading The Visionary's Handbook.
Okay.
This is a very, very old book that was given to me by a mentor over 10 years ago, and it's worth rereading every few years.
Awesome. I've never read that one. I don't know if I've heard of it, but I'll look into it. Number 2, what do you like the most about yourself?
My ability to understand people.
Yeah, that's handy in your line of work and just in life in general, I guess. Yeah. Number 3, what's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to you?
My daughter told me I was fun. that that was very important. That was very flattering for her to think that.
To think that you're fun.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny that the little things like that mean so much, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And especially in this world and in the work that we do, we're so serious all the time. And so it's very important for me to have fun and to let loose and to get lighter and not be so stiff and so serious all the time. So for her to think that of me was really, because kids won't lie, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad she thinks you're fun. So number 4, what childhood dream have you accomplished?
Being a mother.
Nice. That's something you wanted since you were young?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, that's awesome. Do you plan on having any, well, I don't know, if, again, personal question, you don't have to answer, but are you thinking about more kids or just keeping it the way it
No,
is? Yeah.
it's just the one. Yeah, she's 12 now, so she's a big girl. She's not even a kid anymore.
Oh yeah.
If you ask her, she's smarter than I am.
Yeah.
But it would be, and I mean, my mom asks me this question all the time, right? Are you going to have a second? Are you going to have another? But I think that the gap is just too big right now. A 12-year-old and then a baby, like, no, thank you. I don't want to go.
You want to sleep at night, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And the final question is, what's the scariest goal you've ever set?
To 10x my company in 2 years.
Nice. That's awesome. That's a new goal or something you had set in the past?
It's something we are on track to accomplishing.
Beautiful. Good job. So on that note, how do people reach you and what services do you provide?
So for property management services, we can go to www.icpmpros.com. And you can reach me at natasha@icpmpros.com.
Perfect.
And the services that we provide within the property management company are tenant placement. We provide ongoing management services and also renovation management. So we do a lot of duplex conversions, just kind of facelifts or for full renovation jobs. And we also have an Airbnb in Uvita, Costa Rica. It's a
Nice.
beautiful 3-villa property with 2 pools. It's walking distance to the beach from the Whale's Tail. The Whale's Tail, if you Google it, it's this beautiful peninsula, you can call it, in the shape of a whale's tail that jets out of the water. And it's just, it's a stunning, it's a beautiful place to be, and it's a beautiful place to see. So we've recently acquired this property, and it's on Airbnb now. It's called Kokomo in Uvita. And that's something we provide as well.
Beautiful. Okay, well, I'll be sure to include that information in the show notes. I appreciate you sharing everything you shared today, Natasha, and it was great connecting with you. I wish you all the best in Costa Rica. And I don't know if you'll be back soon, but hopefully I'll see you at another Durham REI meeting.
Absolutely, yes. We do plan on coming back twice a year. I mean, our families are there, our businesses are there. So I definitely look forward to seeing everybody again, especially you.
Okay, sounds good, Natasha. Enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
As always, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the content. And if you did, I ask you to share this with a friend, with a family member, somebody who might benefit. And it's always appreciated if you can leave us a review, especially if you're listening to it on the Apple Podcasts app, or if you're on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe, comment, and your support is always appreciated. Thank you very much.